All right, Lewis, welcome to Impossible Trade-offs. You are my first guest in season 2, so I'm really excited to have you.
Nice season premiere.
Season premiere, and we have plenty to talk about on all of this. I've given people a little bit of an intro to you before we jumped into this conversation. But before we jump into democracy works and all of that, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself, your background, and some of the work that you do?
Sure. My background, I actually started as a software engineer. I did that. It was my first job out of college. Gave me an appreciation for technology, how to build software, the software development lifecycle. Always with the understanding that I wanted to be an attorney. And I went to law school, graduated from law school, jumped right into intellectual property law, a lot of trademarks, copyrights, patents, data security, data privacy. And from there, after that law firm life, really tried to figure out how I could do some more social good. So I, similar to LeBron, took my talents to the nonprofit sector, did a 4-year stint at the YMCA, really learned a lot about nonprofit law there and just operating in that sort of environment. And then my next step, I ran a criminal background screening company. And that gave me an appreciation for public records data, monetizing it, collecting it, and all those different steps along the way really prepared me for the role at Democracy Works. And I arrived as its general counsel. It's a nonprofit, it's in tech, it's doing good. And it really just brought together a lot of the skills that I developed along the way. So I wouldn't have been able to predict it, but I am exactly in the place I should be.
It's kind of funny how the universe works that way, right? Like you don't necessarily see the dots connecting when you're walking the path, but then you look backwards and you're like, "Oh, this all makes a ton of sense." um well, for the folks that don't know, and a little bit of history for everybody, I have been involved with Democracy Works for quite some time since my Facebook days. I've been on the board now since like 5 years, I want to say, like 2019, I think 2018, maybe it's 6 years. I'm not sure. But for those folks that
Yeah.
don't know, can you just tell folks a little bit about what Democracy Works is and what it does?
Yeah. So in its essence, Democracy Works seeks to get voters information from election officials and authoritative sources so that they are able to vote. The origin story for our organization, our founder and CEO, Seth Flaxman, or at least the way he tells it, he missed a number of elections because he just didn't have access to the information on the who, what, when, where, how in those particular years while he was at college. And his grad school project was developing a platform called TurboVote, and that leaned a lot into activating college campuses, really reaching an audience that, because of its transient nature, not being at home, not being plugged in, particularly into the events of the day, potentially could miss elections. And that's where it started in 2010. If you fast forward to 2016, 2020, the organization grew to heights that allow it to be the we'll call the distributor, the information fountain of choice for some of the world's largest search engines and social media platforms. Very early on, this organization identified that in order to reach as many people as possible at scale, it makes sense to use technology and to partner with the largest technology providers. It reaches, the young, the in between, and the senior. And yeah, that's really what Democracy Works is all about, facilitating and making the voting process easier, educating the public, and just giving folks the tools that they need to effectively cast the ballot.
So I find that pulling together this work is something that I call what seems like a seemingly simple list, but is actually quite complex. You do a lot of work. Like election officials are the authoritative source, but like explain why there's a need for an organization like Democracy Works to aggregate that data.
Absolutely. As you well know, it's not hundreds of election offices around the country. It's thousands. It's not hundreds of elections that occur on election day or every day in between. It's thousands. And given the disparate nature and the way that elections are run in this country, it's difficult to get all of that information in one place. And why does it need to be in one place? Because folks in this country, they look for their election information in just as many places as there are election offices. So, election offices aren't resourced in the same way across the board, where you might have a big city election office that has an unlimited budget and can have all the fancy websites with all the information that's updated, in real time. There's just as many, if not more, that don't have those resources. So what we try to do at Democracy Works is to level the playing field so that every piece of information is brought to a similar level. It's packaged in one nice, box, and then it's sent off to the largest distributors in the country. So whether it's a Google or a Meta, or this year we've got TikTok running with us for this election cycle. We're dipping our toe into generative AI. We have a newly announced partnership with Anthropic. It's really about making sure that we can aggregate all this information in a way that you wouldn't be able to aggregate it otherwise. There's not all that much coordination between every election office in the country, so there's really no tie that bind, say, for Democracy Works. So that's kind of the role that we play, and the breach we tried to fill.
And I mean, the need for this information has grown in so much more importance. It's always been important, but like I've been talking to a few folks, since 2020, most Americans, they didn't know the ins and outs of how votes were counted or results were released. They just knew that they showed up at a precinct, they cast their ballot, they watched the TV that night, and they know who the winner is. And there was a new poll that came out recently by the Bipartisan Policy Center and the Integrity Institute and States United that I was a part of doing, because we really wanted to get an understanding of where Americans not only were getting their election news, but like who were the trusted sources. And one of the like a couple of interesting things that came out of that. One is trust in election officials has unfortunately gone down. But another thing that we saw is that many people trust that the votes in their community are going to be counted okay. They don't trust how they're going to get counted elsewhere around the world, or not around the world. That's my other job, doing global elections around the country. And so, when you think about it, nobody's ever really needed to know about the fact that there's thousands of election officials, and that it's okay that how votes in Green Bay, Wisconsin are counted are different than how they're counted in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But now more people, that's becoming much more to the forefront, and we have to think more creatively about how we help people sort of know every step of that process. And so I'm curious of how you also, there's also many other orgs, the National Association of Secretaries of States, there's the Election Assistance, is it Commissioner Council? It's EAC. I'm curious of how, if you can explain a bit about how Democracy Works fits into that that entire ecosystem.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned NAS, National Association of Secretary of State, EAC. They're not technology groups. They're more resource organizations. So NAS is sort of, they create resources for secretaries of state. They do convenings so that folks can talk about election issues. But when it comes to developing technology platforms or collecting the data from their various states, that's not what they do. Same thing with the EAC. They are in service of the space and in service of voters, but they really are not going to be the ones that set up technology hooks or technology products to help collect all the information that you're alluding to that voters in the United States are interested in. I think that the 2016 election, the 2020 election have made have propped up an entertainment industry around elections. And if you are the right election official in the right jurisdiction, you've got some notorieties. You've got your Brad Raffenspergers, your Gabriel Sterlings. With that comes increased scrutiny, and it comes increased scrutiny by voters, and they want to know how this works and why doesn't this work, and why is my registration deadline in my neighborhood different than the one in the neighborhood of my friend's state across the country. And in the absence of a what we'll call an encyclopedia or a glossary, or that you can just look at these things, that's on a either federal website, I guess it would be a vote.gov, or some central resource like an AS, this is where Democracy Works fits in. It really tries to put all the information together. Now, it is not often that you'll get someone that says, I want to read the encyclopedia on voting procedure and election guidance voting information on 50 states. How it manifests itself is it's likely a piece of technology that wants to source the data. And that's where we really separate ourselves from the pack. We've recently developed an elections information API. Um, it's what your computer does, what it connects to make sure that you can surface the information to your particular audience. So again, whereas the organizations that you mentioned are developing resources and supporting election officials and the operators and helping with some communications to the public, when it comes to a technology backend, really collecting information, data, that's what we do. And it's not just what happens after the election, because that gets all the coverage in the press. What we focus on primarily is how you actually get to casting a ballot. So whether it's the guidelines or the rules around registering to vote, your particular polling location, the hours of a polling location, basically everything up until the point that you cast the ballot. Then you can go sit at home and watch national news on the returns.
But you don't cover things like candidates, right? It's more the mechanics of the where, when, and how to vote, right? You're not collecting info and like who's running for each office and stuff like that.
We are now. That is something that we've worked into our elections information API for 2024. We're going to be collecting all of the candidates in a particular election, sample ballot information, initiatives, amendments. We want to make sure that voters have all the information that they need to confidently cast the vote when their time comes up.
That's amazing. And then, there was also a recent story that just came out in Proof News, which is a new organization that's been started that did some testing of some of the AI models, OpenAI and others. And, not surprisingly, they are finding that it's not, some of these models are not, they're either returning old information, they don't know the nuances of the laws in some of these places, like whether or not you can wear campaign t-shirts or hats, when you go to the polling place. Is that the type of information too that's sort of included in your API?
Yeah. The one about the whether or not you can wear a particular candidate's hat, I'm not sure if that information is in our elections API. I'd have to check with the team on that one. But everything about registration deadlines, to polling locations, to what is on the ballot, that is in our API. I read that article with great interest. Because and I've heard you say this over the past 6 7 months, Katie. It's this question about whether or not generative AI is going to make a big impact in this particular election. And the early returns based on the article you just cite and the survey data from Bipartisan Policy Center, States United Integrity Institute, is when it comes to generative AI, not quite yet. Now that could change between now and November, but I think there's a hesitancy at this point with the accuracy of the data. And then based on our conversations at Democracy Works with some of the platforms, because we're obviously trying to support them either by using our elections API, scraping our pages, or in the absence of them being able to build a native experience, at the very least, linking out to a comprehensive voter solution like TurboVote. One of the things that we talk to them about is elections data is not very conducive to learning via an LLM. And why is that? It just changes at a speed that isn't conducive to providing a good result for a voter or a visitor. Right now, we're dealing with, for example, another situation in Delaware. 2022, after the election period had started, voting period had started, Supreme Court decision changes some of the rules around absentee voting. 2024, we're in primary season. Again, change at the last minute when it comes to procedure around either early vote or absentee voting. You leave this to an LLM that's trying to search the internet and sleuth and try to create derivative works based on everything that it's finding, you're necessarily going to get an inaccurate result. So our hypothesis at Democracy Works is when it comes to election information, it really ought to be a fetch of a result rather than a learn of information that you're pulling in either via an API or by scraping the internet. And that requires organizations like ours to be very, very expert on the subject matter and being timely and constantly following up with these different offices and making sure that the information that we surface is evergreen, it's recent, it's the thing that it is right now. And I know that in the survey results put out by BPC, States United Integrity Institute, election officials and election offices did not rank high as the source of the information. You see that it's national news media, it's social, it's search. But when it comes to people and groups, folks still trust election officials, maybe not in the same ways that they did, 4, 8 years ago, but they're trusted. The issue is that election officials do not have the resources to reach voters at scale that some of these search engines and social media platforms have. And that's where we serve that critical function. We bridge the two communities to make sure that authoritative information is available in the places, apps, the groups, and the sites that people actually are looking at. And when I look at those survey results, it really justifies and emboldens me and the rest of our organization in thinking we placed the right bet. I mean, we went to search, we went to social, went into the places where voters are actually looking.
And, I have to imagine that this kind of must be constantly evolving, right? Like, so, like you said, I think another thing from that survey that is important to note is that very few people were using AI chatbots to go and look for election information. That's just not a part of most people's um, everyday stuff right now. I mean, I'm just starting to incorporate it into my everyday kind of like but I'm trying to learn it. Like I'm consciously trying to do that. And I very much liken it to sort of what social media was to Obama in 2008. And, but then it changed a lot in 2012. And frankly, 2012 at Facebook is amongst the first elections when we really started doing some more in depth things on trying to show people election day reminders and information about registering to vote and things of that nature. And so I suspect that there's going to be how this information is incorporated into today's LLMs, but then I imagine it will continue to evolve because I was talking to some engineers when I was out in California, and they were just talking about, the need for experts in training models. How does that look like? How does that look like with authoritative information? And it is, like you said, it's different than a search results type thing. And so how do you train the models to put out some of that, how they're summarizing this information and stuff like that? Is that something, I mean, your team is so heads down right now, just getting ready for 2024 and getting all that information. But how are you all also thinking about using AI as part of just your own the tooling and stuff that you're building? And I want to get a bit into the tools and how you actually reach voters, but let's stay on the AI course here for a second.
Yeah, we have not had robust conversations yet about using generative AI to source or collect information. That is not on our roadmap currently. I don't know. We're kind of with all reliable here. We have some tried and true methods for collecting the information. Given the propensity for hallucination and incorrect results, we certainly wouldn't want to put ourselves in a position to disenfranchise a voter. So, at least for this current cycle and for the foreseeable future, we'll be using the methods for collecting the information that we best understand. I think there's some opportunities with AI that might help us on multi-language support. For a nonprofit of our size, it's really difficult to pump out guidance in all the various languages that are spoken in the country. If there's some efficiency to be gained there by using AI, certainly something that we're open to. I think when it comes to AI for Democracy Works, we are most interested with the platforms in being the source of the data to fuel their platforms. As I mentioned earlier, I just don't think that election offices in mass are resourced to the level that they'd be able to connect directly to these platforms. And I think just as a matter of efficiency, I'm not sure that these large platforms would want to contract or develop relationships with 10, 15, 20,000 offices around the country. So I think that that's our sweet spot. We've been heads down for the last 8, 9 months, really looking at this issue of election information and LLMs, the risk of hallucinations. What are the best ways to kind of solve for that? As I mentioned earlier, we believe it's more of a fetch a result than attempt to learn a result. And we're also learning as well. And while we've been doing this for 9 months, we have a good appreciation of what the risks are. We would really like to be in the laboratory with some of these platforms to help develop their native experiences. Because right now, whether it's OpenAI pushing traffic out to Can I Vote, or even our new partnership with Anthropic, where they're going to push out to Turbo Vote, that's still not a native experience. And I think that folks have become accustomed to you type your thing in the Google search box and you get your result right there rather than being sent to another property. I think that's the ideal place. And we want to be a partner to any of the platforms that wants to get there when it comes to serving Americans in elections.
So you mentioned TurboVote a few times and, and also working a lot with the platforms and stuff like that, but you have these sort of native tools that you can use to like reach voters. Can you walk through all those kind of different ways that you all then once you have all this data, you're trying to get it out into the hands of voters?
Absolutely. So TurboVote is our internal distribution platform for this all this election information that we collect, and we describe it as a no or low code solution. So any organization out there that's seeking to engage an audience when it comes to elections, they have the opportunity to have a TurboVote landing page, or alternatively, if they've got the software development aptitude, or even just an interest in working with us a little bit more, they can embed many of the TurboVote tools on their website, so it adopts the native look and feel of their particular brand. Um, TurboVote, as we mentioned earlier, it's voter registration assistance. It's all of the what you need to know, the key changes about the process, and making sure that you're ready on election day. It also can help you get a polling location. In addition to TurboVote, Democracy Works operates or controls the Voting Information Project. It has done so since 2018, and that's the largest repository of polling location information for elections in the United States. In the article that you cited about the AI platforms and how they were surfacing, questionable information, one of the routes that was analyzed was whether or not it could accurately respond to a polling location request in response to a zip code. We've built a voting information tool. It's used by the state of California. It's used by campaigns. Many people use the voting information tool. That's back-ended by Democracy Works. When it comes to polling location information, especially aggregating it and being the central clearinghouse, Democracy Works has owned that space for quite a while. So whether it's the when to vote, the how to vote, the where to vote, and now as of 2024, the what's on my ballot, Democracy Works tries to cover the entirety of the space via its various products. We've got TurboVote, we've got VIP, which is a project that we run, and we also have the Elections Information API, along with a developer toolkit to help folks that might be new to this space but want to create applications and products, walk them through the best practices and how to really engage with voters in a responsible way with authoritative information.
Yeah, I really encourage people, like, whether you are searching for information or if you're looking up your polling place or anything like that, be paying attention because it might be powered by TurboVote and you just don't realize how much of that is happening on the back end. It is not magic. There is a team at Democracy Works who's actually helping to build all of that and pull that information for you. Now, it's not just companies that you're providing the information to. It's not just voters that you're providing the information to, but you also work with all sorts of type of businesses through the Civic Alliance in terms of them helping to, whether it's get their employees civically engaged, their customers civically engaged. Tell us a bit more about the Civic Alliance and that work.
Absolutely. So Democracy Works is a nonpartisan organization, and it guards its nonpartisan stance zealously. Like, we never seek to put our thumb on the scale in any particular way, except when it comes to getting people engaged in the civic process. And similar to how we think about search engines and social, we're always looking for ways to reach folks at scale. And when you look at the business community in the United States, it's one of the rare institutions that hasn't taken a complete beating over the last 10 years. There's still high levels of trust between employees and employers, and folks identify with brands of all different sizes. So given that that's the case, it's another channel for us to get election information and get people activated on the topic of voting in a scalable way. So the Civic Alliance is a coming together of over 1,300 companies employing 5.8 million folks in the United States with products and services that are consumed by every American, and for our purposes, by every voter. And it's getting them, whether it's supporting their employees or their customers with voter registration drives. Some of these companies have a significant real estate footprints. They can open up their properties as polling locations, which is a big deal, especially when we talk about places in the country that are somewhat of polling place deserts where people have to either travel long distances or wait on long lines because there aren't enough polling locations. It's a group that we encourage, and you know, in this election, we're almost going to demand, if that's a possibility, pay time off to vote and pay time off to serve as a poll worker. It's really about engaging in nonpartisan activity that makes it easier for your employees or your customers to participate in the civic process. So that's what the Civic Alliance is. It's a lot of companies, it's a lot of employees, and it's them making an investment in democracy, kind of a payback for being able to participate in this great economy in the United States. So a little bit of a down payment on our future. Democracy is good for business, and we believe that business can be good for democracy if it's positioned in a way that it reaches not only their employees but their customers.
I wanted to dig into the nonprofit status because there's, a lot of companies that, will sell this data, they're, or try to pull it together for different organizations. And I'm hoping, like, can you go a little bit more in depth into why the nonprofit status is important for this work and where you all are getting your funding for that?
Sure. The nonprofit status is important for this work because there really isn't a robust market for election information. It's not the sort of thing that you can really make a profit off of. Even when I think about some of our largest for-profit partners, your big search engines, your big social, they'll pay for this, but this is really not going to drive revenue for them. It's almost like a community service. So there's a ceiling to how much revenue you can bring in to an enterprise that has expense in collecting all this data. I mean, we have software engineers, we've got web services, we have all the things, we're building products. So there is expense putting this together. The IRS code, it clearly states that, activity for civic education, civic engagement, voter engagement, and nonpartisan voter registration drives is within the activities that you can conduct as a charitable entity, a nonprofit. So that's how we support the revenue that we're not making from the for-profit or earned revenue side of our business. When it comes to who funds us, we'll take funding from whomever is interested in making it easier for folks to vote. The way that usually manifests itself is a lot of the big philanthropic foundations that fund many of the organizations in this space. I think of note, in the past year, we received a very generous gift from Mackenzie Scott, really a validation of the work that we do around here to be put on her map and her team's radar. But yeah, I mean, we solicit the public for its support, and we take very seriously the responsibility that we have to use those dollars in for the purposes that are outlined in our mission. Namely, we're involved in civic education and voter registration, voter assistance. And yeah, we can always use some more help. But yeah, we've got a number of funders out there, most of the folks that you'd expect in this space.
And you've alluded to a little bit, but I think it's just important to point out that you do work with different organizations across the aisle. You're working with secretaries of state that have a Democratic background, have a Republican background. You're not advocating for, any sort of changes to election laws or anything like that. It's like really this data infrastructure that, like you said, is not something that you can necessarily make a profit off of. But also, I just want to point out too that, like, elections are happening all the time. It's not like you all just do this once every 4 years for the presidential. You all are pulling together information for local elections. Because I remember at Facebook, we used your data to help power local election day reminders. If there was a special election, if there was a mayoral election, things of that nature that are oftentimes happening. This is a ongoing thing. It's not something that you all just spin up every 2 to 4 years.
Absolutely. We will have supported more elections in 2023 than we will in 2024. Now, granted, there are more voters in 2024, but given the nature of local elections, whether it's school board, mayoral, city councils, more of them will have happened in 2023 than we'll support in 2024. And I think that that's it's a statement that needs to be reinforced constantly. Not only, if you're talking to a funding audience or you're talking to a distribution or a platform, a partner, it's to voters. I mean, democracy is a full contact sport. It's happening every day in your community, and making sure that you're tuning in not just in the even numbered years, but in the odd numbered years as well, is likely the best way to ensure that your desires, the wishes that you have a chance of manifesting itself via the democratic process. You've got to be on top of it every year. It's not just when your favorite presidential candidate comes up, or when it's an even numbered year.
So I want to give you a chance to hype up the Democracy Works staff because they're amazing. I mean, we're biased towards that, but they really are. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the types of roles that you're hiring that are exist at Democracy Works, but also if you're hiring. I mean, I think I hate to say if there's a silver lining to the tech layoffs. If somebody's looking for some work in the nonprofit space to do some real good, Democracy Works might be a place to take a look at.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So we are, I'm not sure when this will air, but we are recently or currently in the middle of quite a hiring spree. It's been software engineers, it's been research folks, it's been we're looking for a couple of directors, corporate engagement, because as you mentioned, Civic Alliance, that's a community that needs to be supported. Sales. Earlier we talked about how there is kind of a market cap, a ceiling when it comes to the revenue that can be generated, but we're constantly looking for new opportunities and new distribution channels and new groups of people that are looking to engage their respective audiences when it comes to voting. So it's really a continuation of what we've been doing over the last 2-3 years. I became CEO in 2022, trying to move it from a plucky nonprofit that's like, hey, you're on a college campus, let's get you to vote, but more to, kind of the data behemoth when it comes to elections information that we aspire to be. And that requires talent. We know there's talent out there. It, Despite the fact that we want folks to be interested in elections, and organizations like Democracy Works every year in presidentials, folks tend to gravitate. So, we've been getting a lot of applications, and we're really happy to see the interest that folks have in joining us in the important work that we have this year. But yeah, check our website, democracy.works, the careers page. There's things that pop up every now and then. But they don't stay up for long because right now we're benefiting from a great deal of interest in helping join us in our work.
So I got two final questions for you. One, if folks want to get in touch because they're working at a company and want to learn more about the data you have, or just want to, they're interested in more, what's the best way to get a hold of you all?
Info@democracy.works. We constantly monitor that mailbox. We are looking for data partners. I think this is something that's still a bit of a burgeoning enterprise. Folks have traditionally relied on someone else to be the one that processes and presents the data. We're in an era of innovation right now with new tech popping up and new platforms. And we know that there are developers out there that would really benefit from having that source of data to power their sites, their applications. Hit us up, info@democracy.works. We just got out of a beta period 2 or 3 months ago. We had a Google developer group. Like we developed this with eyes and with participation from the technology space. We've prepared developer resources, toolkits, so that you understand some of the pitfalls around things like LLMs that hallucinate and whatnot. So yeah, we've got a lot of information here, and we're looking to partner because that's how we learn as well. Democracy Works operates in favor of the space.
And last question, what are you most excited about, not only for this year, but in terms of the future and how you're thinking about all this?
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier. We want to kind of be the hub. We want to be the place that people go to. You were talking about our nonpartisan bent. Um, we treat our data and we treat our organization and our tools as if it were the public library. If you have a library card, we're here for you to give you access to no and low code solutions or critical election information sourced from authoritative sources, so that you can get your respective audience engaged in democracy. That's what we're here for, and really just growing the number of people and partners that we're reaching. We care very, very deeply about voting. We care very, very deeply about democracy, and we want to have as much participation in this election in 2024 and every other election as possible.
Well, that's amazing. Louis, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Take care.
All right, let me stop that.